Kevin Haggerty with J. Davidson Frame, author of Framing Decisions, Decision-Making that Accounts for Irrationality, People, and Constraints. David, I'm intrigued by the title of Chapter 7, The Wisdom and Foolishness of Crowds. It sounds like there must be a story behind that one. Could you share that with us?
There's a story for sure. Back in the middle of the 19th century, there was, I believe he was a Scottish guy named John MacKay, who wrote a very interesting book called The Madness of Crowds. And MacKay has a number of chapters, a dozen chapters or so, where he talks about various crowd manias that existed throughout history, where you have large groups of people, fundamentally mobs, basically making decisions based on mob mentality. Okay, and these aren't rational or clear-cut decisions. They're based on people following the crowd, lemming-like decisions. So he wrote this book, and it's very funny, and actually is very perceptive. And as you're reading the different chapters, you're going, wow, people can be crazy when they operate in larger groups. Okay, well, more recently, an American journalist named James Surowiecki wrote a very intriguing and very well-written book called The Wisdom of the Crowds. And he argues the opposite of MacKay. He was aware of MacKay's work, and he thought MacKay made some very good points. But Surowiecki points out in today's era, in today's world, where we have huge amounts of information, and we have an interconnected world, and particularly interconnected through the internet, he says that we have situations now where you can't get away from it. You've got to make large-scale group decisions because so much of what we have to deal with in the world deals with an integrated, interrelated world. And in his research, he found that very often decisions made by large groups consistently outperform decisions made by experts. So he wants to alert us to the wisdom of teams, the wisdom of group think, okay, because he says that through these group processes where you have group input, you have much richer decisions that reflect a broader spectrum of inputs. So that's where the title came from, sort of juxtaposing these two books that nail down these extremes.
Right, but common sense tells me that there should be a range from the individual making decisions in isolation all the way to the other end of the continuum, decision by community. Aren't there stages in between? Let me first talk about the range, okay? So there is a range. You're absolutely right. There would be a range varying from, and we call the individual decision maker, we call that an autocrat. So you do have a range from an autocratic decision making all the way through highly decentralized, what you call community decision making. Yes, there is a range. And the autocrat, if you think of the term autocrat, it has Greek origins. Auto means self, crat means decision. So the autocratic decision maker isn't particularly interested in gaining feedback from others. And then you have the community decision making, where basically it's all for one and one for all on a large scale. Right, but I'm curious, shouldn't there be some levels in between the two extremes?
Yes, there are. That's a good point. Certainly there are levels between the extremes. For example, one level up, I'll call it one level up from the autocrat, is the consultative leader. And I would venture to say that most of the CEOs of companies that we most admire, okay, people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, their leadership and their decision-making style would be the consultative decision maker, where they retain the right to be the final arbiter in making a decision. However, they don't just make decisions without feedback. In fact, they eagerly get input from other players. So they're out there soliciting guidance, getting the input, and then at a certain point they say, enough, let me make the decision. Okay, so that's a step up from the autocrat, but it's still much more autocratic than other decision-making modalities. One step below, let's say, the community decision-making modality is you have self-directed work units. And these are extremely popular in the 1990s, where you have what were called self-managed teams, where the team is empowered to, within certain well-defined limits, to have a lot of decision-making authority over the details of how they go about doing their jobs. Okay, and so those were called the self-directed work units, and when they were carried out properly, they were really quite effective. And basically, it was an all-for-one, one-for-all process of decision-making within teams.
One of the fascinating sections in Chapter 7 I found to be where you tell us about the honeybees and how they choose a new home. Could you relate that to us briefly?
Sure. One of the, I would say I always have my list of 5 best books. One of the 5 best books I've read in the last couple of years, certainly one of the more fun books I've read, is a book titled Honeybee Democracy. And it's written by a bee expert. And in the book, which is copiously illustrated, okay, so it's got great stories, it's got great science, and it's got a lot of illustrations showing how bee communities make these collective decisions that wind up being life and death decisions. Now, what makes this decision-making approach very interesting is that individual bees have practically no brain at all. Okay, they don't think. They don't have thinking capabilities and decision-making capabilities individually. But collectively, over a 30 million year period, evolution has enabled the hive collectively to make very significant decisions on crucial issues like where should we go to hunt for honey? Okay, where will we find the flowers that will produce, that will enable us to get the nectar that we can bring back and convert into honey, which enables the communities to survive. Or many hives once a year, as they have burgeoning populations, reach the point where the hive is too small to accommodate all the bees, so they have a mechanism, okay, where the bees, about half of the community leaves the hive and they go nearby just 30, 40 meters to a nearby tree, and they collect as a swarm, and within a day or two, after certain scouts go out and check out possible places to relocate, typically within a half a kilometer or a kilometer, the scouts come back, and if they do a vigorous dance, it's called the waggle dance. If they do a really vigorous waggle dance, they'll convince members of the community to go out, check out the site, maybe 40 or 100 members, and the members come back, they'll all do a waggle dance, and then the whole community says, this is where we want to move. So even though you have fundamentally brainless critters here, collectively they are able, through this group decision-making process, to survive and thrive.
Now, David, in your role as academic dean at the University of Management and Technology, I've had occasion to see you running around campus challenging people to guess how much a sack full of books weighs or how many marbles are in a jar. Have those experiments yielded fruit in terms of the wisdom or foolishness of crowds collectively?
Yeah, that's again, you're right, and I do that. I do a lot of teaching also in China, so I use that in China, where I have my Chinese students estimate how many peanuts are in a pile. And I began doing those experiments because I have a strong experimental background. Okay, I come up from scientific organizations originally, where we did lots of experiments, and so I have an inclination to experiments. And also, I was bothered by some of the stories James Surowiecki offers in his book. It's a good book, The Wisdom of Crowds. But he, I think, overstates how He provides a lot of evidence from professors who say that they had their students count marbles or count this and count that, and that the students remarkably, collectively as a large group, were able to come up with answers on the number of marbles or how much something weighs and so forth. They were able to do it collectively. They came up with astonishingly accurate results. And I just don't believe it. Okay, I just don't believe it. I think on something like that, we have I think the experts can consistently outperform the group. So at UMT we ship a lot of books, so we have about 5 or 6 people who are experts on book weights, okay, because they ship the books all the time and they have to put postage and they know how much they weigh. And then we have the rest of the administrative staff who aren't experts. And one experiment I did was to have, I took a sack, I put a bunch of items in it, then I closed the sack so no one could see what was in it, and I had people try to estimate the weight of the sacks, and the people who worked in our book shipping department consistently outperformed the overall crowd, very heavily so. The experts were very accurate in estimating how much this sack weighed without knowing what was inside it than the non-experts. So again, my research suggests that that basically in the whole realm of activities, experts consistently outperform the crowd.
So it seems that humans are not quite ready to compete with honeybees in terms of community decision making. I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts on the relative merits of individual versus group decision making.
Sure.